Thank you for joining this very chilly evening. Um, we're going to begin with some kirtan and then we're going to chapter 21. We're going to complete the first part of chapter 21 and the whole chapter. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prasharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Rishitarine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prasharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Rishitarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Gora Hari Bol Nitai Gora Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gora Hari Bol Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Shri Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Govinande Hari. So again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We're going to continue in our discussions on chapter 21, which is we're actually concluding today with this chapter. We'll begin with our prayers. Om Gyanantimirandasya Dinangina Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunivari Pachati Deshitarine. Thank you all for this opportunity to try and present an overview of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. This is a wonderful work by Srila Prabhupada that's based on the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is the authorized biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So I pray for all your blessings to the justice to this class so we can have a better idea of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings and pastimes, so we can serve and love him better. So this 21st chapter is called the Mayavadi Sannyas. The Mayavadi philosophers are converted. This group of sannyasis met with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the area called Varanasi, in those days called Benares, and the Lord was able to convince them with his wonderful explanations on the Vedanta philosophy. We will begin this chapter today with the invocation, which is verse 18 of the 18th, verse 18 of the first chapter of the first part of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. The translation is: Glory to Shri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Shri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So last week we read of the appreciation that the sannyasis had after Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's wonderful explanation of Vedanta. In particular, the chief disciple of the head of these sannyasis, Prakashananda Saraswati, this chief disciple started praising the Lord and his explanation. So the disciple had said very strongly that if anyone takes to the path of knowledge, that is known as jnana, when anyone takes to that path of jnana and rejects bhakti, particularly the reason that people do this is thinking that jnana is superior, thinking that knowledge is superior to bhakti, considering that bhakti is sentimentalism. Such a person's effort would be like trying to beat a husk that's already been milled, right? A useless effort. This is a very strong statement indeed. So the reason he's saying that is because if you're trying to take to the path of jnana, of knowledge, to try to become one with God, it's definitely a useless endeavor because nobody can become one with God. The second reason is that it's a lot of hard work for nothing. Right? The path of jnana is very difficult when we analyze it in comparison to bhakti in three aspects: the intention that one has, the process that one has to undergo, as well as the goal that one has to attain. So there's another aspect that we're going to discuss tonight before we move on to the rest of the chapter. And this is important in order to understand what a great component mercy is in us getting the opportunity to engage in bhakti yoga. So let's look at it from the jnana perspective. The way that one comes to jnana is after practically millions of lifetimes of being frustrated with material life. So material life in general is explained according to either the karma or the karma yoga path, right? So karma is the cycle of actions and reactions that everyone is actually engaged in. And karma yoga are the activities prescribed in the Vedas in order to become free of the reactions and at least practice some detachment in life. So one who is in the cycle of karma is basically working, enjoying, suffering, working, enjoying, suffering, working, enjoying, and suffering. Right? And at some point, someone may wake up and get fed up of this, wondering how come every time they try to enjoy, the enjoyment is always short-lived, it's always disappointing in some way or the other, and that there's so much of suffering no matter what one does, and that work itself is also very frustrating, very unfulfilling, and they wonder if there's something more to life. So this point that one awakens to the understanding that material life is basically futile, material enjoyment is futile. And then one starts asking the questions about why one is actually here, what one's goal is, what one actually is, This is the point when someone takes to the path of jnana, right? Because then one starts looking for the knowledge that will get them out of this constant cycle of work and enjoyment and suffering, which also leads to the greater cycle of birth and death. Okay, so this path of jnana and how one comes to it is explained in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 7, text 3, where Krishna says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kashid yatati siddhaye yatadam api siddhanam kashin mam veti tattvataha. And he says, out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection. And of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. So these many thousands who are going around are those in karma and karma yoga. They're accumulating reactions and then perhaps taking to some path to alleviate those reactions, which is karma yoga. And the one that endeavors for truth is the one that wakes up out of this karma and karma yoga and takes to jnana. So it's not as easy as just, waking up one day and deciding that one has had enough of this futile material sense gratification. It actually comes as a result of many lifetimes of accumulating piety. When one has that piety, one is able to see things as they are and try to look for the knowledge that will get one out of the cycle of birth and death. Okay. So the Vedas, therefore, is full of rituals and full of knowledge in order to help one to attain that piety. And these rituals are generally referred to as the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. This is where all the Vedic processes are. So the Vedas weren't, of course, always like this, weren't always so full of Karma Kanda. We read in Srimad Bhagavatam that the Vedas were actually given to Lord Brahma in the form of the holy names of the Lord, Om Tat Sat, because Brahman and the very enlightened persons of Satya Yuga, at the beginning of creation, were able to understand everything, all knowledge, through the holy names. In the same way that Lord Chaitanya has given us the holy names now, so that we can also get all transcendental knowledge through those holy names. As the quality of the people deteriorated, though, the Vedas then started to accommodate the increasing desire for sense gratification. And so the Karma Kanda sections began to appear in the Vedas. Right? Srimad Bhagavatam also describes that. So knowing this, knowing now that the Karma Kanda sections are there, and yet at the same time knowing that Krishna says that he's the goal of the Vedas, and of course that means devotional service is the goal of the Vedas, how do we reconcile these two? How do we reconcile that there is so much Karma Kanda and yet at the same time we're supposed to get Krishna in devotional service at the end of all of it? So we all know that to preach to anyone who is so fixed in material enjoyment is very difficult. To try to preach the message of detachment, of the importance of focusing on transcendental knowledge rather than enjoyment, trying to explain the importance of devotional service, right? It's difficult when someone's mind is so obsessed with material enjoyment. And Krishna also says that we shouldn't unsettle these people, right? This is his instruction in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. But at the same time, they have a tendency to rituals, to charity, perhaps to sacrifice, and so on. So in this way, they can be encouraged by engaging in these activities to develop some degree of detachment, because they are parting with their hard-earned fruits of labor in order to sacrifice in this way. And they're also accumulating piety. Okay, when they donate or when they give to religious causes, when they engage in religious activities, like yagya, for example, they can accumulate piety. And if they particularly perform these activities as much in the mode of goodness as can be hoped for, then they will be prevented from falling into the lower species at least. And this is described as the greatest type of fear in Bhagavad Gita. So there's some benefit that they get. And then in time, with all the accumulated piety, they may one day wake up to the understanding that material enjoyment is futile, and they may start taking to the path of jnana, right? They may start looking for knowledge to get them out of the cycle and of birth and death. This is what the Lord describes as perfection. So therefore, we can see that the path of karma kanda or karma yoga eventually will lead to jnana, right? When the person gets enough piety. And then from jnana, they will be able to at least aim for the self-realization. So this is how we understand that the Vedas, though having so much of ritualistic activities contained therein, is not only for wanton sense gratification, or we could say sense gratification in a righteous way. Okay, the Vedic civilization is very highly advanced. Srila Prabhupada explains this in so many places. So we can understand that the greatest body of literature, then the Vedic literature, wouldn't just be about how to engage in what we could say self-righteous enjoyment. Right? There must be a higher aim. The Vedas does mention extensively about getting out of the cycle of birth and death, and so this is one of the ways to do it, or one of the ways to help those who are so immersed in sense enjoyment, right? To gradually elevate them by the performance of these ritualistic activities to a level where they can understand transcendental knowledge, jnana. So Krishna therefore says in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita in verses 42 and 43 that we shouldn't be distracted by the flowery words of this karma kanda section. So I'm not sure about you, but I also kind of wondered when I read about this, why Krishna would say in the second chapter that we shouldn't be distracted by the words of the Vedas, and then in chapter 15 he says that he is the knower of the Vedas, and by the Vedas he is to be known, and that he's the compiler of Vedanta, which is obviously based in the Vedas. So Srila Prabhupada explains in Canto 3 of Srimad Bhagavatam that all contradictions are resolved in Krishna, right? By his transcendental nature as the absolute truth. Even things that are apparently contradictory, apparently opposite to each other, can be reconciled. So we can reconcile this as well. Okay, so even though the Lord is saying on one hand that we shouldn't be distracted by the flowery words, we also don't reject the Vedas altogether, because the flowery words that speak of the byproducts of sacrifices, right, that explain how one can get good birth, power, going to the heavenly planets, these things should not distract one. If one is on the path of these ritualistic activities, one should understand that the ultimate goal is Krishna. He's the indirect of these sacrifices in the end, and eventually, when one crosses over their material enjoyment through the accumulation of piety and gets to jnana and attains self-realization, from there one will be able to seriously pursue the attainment of love of Godhead, and if one gets the mercy of your devotee, then one can take to bhakti yoga, and this is where Krishna will be attained more easily. So even though it is a long path, if one goes through this route of karma yoga, one will still end up in the devotional service of the Lord. And so he is indeed the aim of the Vedas in any way that one looks at it. Okay. So we can understand from this that the Jnani, though, also needs the mercy of the devotee. Even though the Jnani does get to the point of self-realization, this is true, mere knowledge alone, which the Jnani is engaged with, is not going to get them further into bhakti. We've already explained a few chapters back that bhakti comes from bhakti. Bhakti doesn't come from knowledge, right? It doesn't come from jnana, and it doesn't come from fruitive activities. It doesn't come from piety that one gets through karma yoga. So one still needs the mercy of a devotee. And that's why Krishna states in this verse that we've quoted, Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, text 3, that even though there may be one person that aims for perfection, that person still may hardly know Krishna in truth, right? So knowing Krishna depends on bhakti, doesn't depend on jnana. Bhakti is always independent. So this may seem like bhakti is a little more difficult to attain, but when we look at it more seriously, we'll see that somebody who takes to jnana yoga has done so after many, many lifetimes of karma, right? They had to do so much karma yoga activities, so many karma kanda rituals, they had to accumulate so much piety. And even when they take to jnana, they need to engage in so much austerity, right? We may think of jnana or accumulation of knowledge as just being study, and it doesn't seem that difficult, right? I mean, all of us have been through school, through university. But this we're talking about is realized knowledge. Jnana is realized knowledge. It means that someone who is on this path, um, alongside their studying, has to also live a certain lifestyle in order to have that knowledge become realized. So it means that they have to have strict mental equilibrium. It means that they have to undergo severe austerity. It means that they have very rigid self-control. Okay, the practices of jnana yoga are in short quite harsh, and that's the reason why there aren't many real jnana yogis left today. There's a lot more people who are engaged in karma yoga, the many thousands, the Lord says, um, quite obvious in Kali Yuga. And even after all of that rigid and severe practice of austerity, there's still no guarantee that the jnana yogi is going to attain to self-realization. But bhakti, on the other hand, doesn't require any of this. It doesn't require lifetime, right? It doesn't require that one actually has done anything in terms of achieving piety or achieving a lot of knowledge. Certainly, it doesn't mean that one has to have any kind of social circumstances or any kind of opulence, any material attributes at all. Nor is it actually hard to attain. Once one gets the mercy of a devotee, one can actually make very quick progress if one is sincere. And that is because of that quality of mercy. Mercy doesn't look at any external qualifications that someone has. And mercy actually carries one along on the path of bhakti so that one can make progress. Anyone who makes progress in the path of bhakti is literally being carried along by the mercy of the devotee, of the spiritual master, of the Lord. And this is quite obvious. So even though one may struggle, one may not be, for example, as renounced as the jnana yogi, even if one is not so rigid in their practices, still because of mercy, one makes great progress in bhakti yoga, right? So the effort is actually being exerted, we could say, by the mercy, whereas the jnana yogi is practically on their own. They have to make all the effort for all the progress that they need to make. So this is the important point. Srila Prabhupada made it quite nicely with an analogy. He said that there's two ways of carrying one's young, right? When one is in the wild, there's the monkey way and there's the cat way. So he explained it that when a baby monkey needs to be carried around by its mother, the baby monkey holds on to the mother and is carried forward as the mother leaps or moves around from place to place. And the effort is all the effort. Sorry, the effort is all the baby monkey's effort. Right? The monkey has to hold on very tightly, otherwise it will fall off. But when it comes to cats and their young, right, the kittens, the cat holds the kitten in its mouth. So all the effort is actually on the mother. It's the mother that takes the responsibility for making sure that the kitten doesn't fall off, and the kitten is quite safe in its mother's jaws. So this is the difference in Jnana Yoga and actually any of the other yogas and Bhakti Yoga. So all those other yogas are like the monkey way, where the effort is all on the practitioner. And Bhakti Yoga is like the cat way, where the mercy of the Lord and the mercy of the devotees actually carries, particularly the mercy of the devotees, actually carries the practitioner forward and protects them on this devotional path. So we will continue reading. After thus explaining his position, the chief student of Prakashananda Saraswati began to chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the Lord had explained to these disciples of Prakashananda Saraswati and Prakashananda Saraswati himself that in this age, the way to get the mercy of the Lord is to chant his holy names. The holy names are bhakti, and the holy names are the goal of bhakti as well. Right? Through this chanting, one can get the perfection of life beyond even self-realization. So we may ask ourselves, Krishna has explained in the verse that we read, chapter 7, text 3, that the perfection is self-realization. So how do we understand bhakti as the perfection? So there's a concept in spiritual life that is not analogous to anything in material life. In spiritual life, there's a concept that even when something is perfect, it can actually get more perfect and most perfect. Okay. So even though self-realization is indeed the perfection of life, there is uh, a more perfect aim and a most perfect aim, or a greater perfection and the greatest perfection. So one who comes to Bhakti Yoga has achieved more of a perfection than self-realization, and then one who achieves love of Godhead has achieved the most perfection. Right. So when we take to chanting the holy name, right, this is the easy way that we can get to the perfect stage, the more perfect stage, and the most perfect stage. The way we can get to self-realization, to devotional service, and pure devotional service, or pure love of Godhead. The problem, of course, is that people don't believe that the process of chanting, in its wonderful simplicity, can actually be greater than Jnana Yoga, or able to deliver greater results than Jnana Yoga. This is a little bit of an unfortunate misconception that happens in the common population, and it's because people think that when you're studying, you're more clever, you're more academic, and that you can get greater results than chanting, which seems simple, or as very unfortunately stated sometimes, as sentimental. Right? But we've discussed quite extensively now that the path of jnana is not only very difficult, but the results are not guaranteed. Certainly, there's no possibility at all that anyone will become God. This is for certain. But even the results of self-realization are not guaranteed. And certainly, then the progression from self-realization to love of Godhead is not guaranteed either. Okay. Bhakti yoga is sublime, though, in that it grants one all the results of jnana. It grants one knowledge and renunciation or detachment from material enjoyment as byproducts, right? Along with the most important the goal, actually, which is love of Godhead. This process of chanting was actually given in the Satya Yuga when the people were most advanced certainly than the common Gyanis of today, for they could understand, they could realize all knowledge within the holy. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us the same opportunity, and in explaining it so wonderfully to these sannyasis, they have taken to the chanting as well, as we can see. Prakashananda Saraswati saw this, and he too admitted the fault of Shankaracharya and said, because Shankaracharya wanted to establish the doctrine of monism, he had no alternative but to interpret the Vedanta Sutra in a different way. Once one accepts the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the doctrine of monism cannot be established. Therefore, by mundane scholarship, Shankaracharya has tried to obscure the actual meaning of the Vedanta Sutra. Not only has Shankaracharya done this, but all authors who attempt to give their own views must misinterpret the Vedanta Sutra. So this is very clear from all of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's explanations thus far, that the Vedanta Sutra actually describes the personality of Godhead. It's descriptions of a person. If we take to Shankaracharya's explanation, it's a diametric opposite. It's not just explaining an impersonal God, it's actually leading one to the idea that there's no God, right? We've explained this on the basis of relativity, that one cannot have a God if everyone is God. So it means that essentially one will never be led to devotional service at all by believing in this this theory of Shankaracharya. One will be led to the exact opposite meaning of what the Vedanta wants to teach us. Okay? The sad thing is, though, that his commentary has been preached so vehemently that people tend to believe that it is the only understanding or the understanding of what the Vedanta is. This is actually the most tragic thing. And it means that they never really take to devotional service. They never really consider devotional service as any kind of option, because Shankaracharya's philosophy rules this out altogether. So people are very willing to believe in this idea of oneness, perhaps because of, certainly because of the false ego. Everybody likes to believe that there's some divinity within them, that there is a God within. And perhaps because it's quite a simplistic a little bit of a lazy way to explain philosophy. Also, some are under the mistaken impression that if we preach the idea that all is one, it will end up with a more peaceful understanding of religion and philosophy. But we've explained before that if we deny that God exists, then we're basically denying the unifying principle of all people, right? We all are children of God. If we don't believe in God, then we don't have a common denominator to unite us. This is true. And then the problem with believing that we are all God is that it just promotes the false ego more. The only way that we can defeat the false ego is by seeing all of ourselves as humble servants of God. When we cultivate that mentality truly and properly, then the false ego is destroyed, because the false ego is actually the idea that we are the controllers. So trying to think of ourselves as God, or trying to achieve the God within, we can see how that is going to promote the false ego, because instead of creating some kind of inner peace as people expect, that will then translate into like an outer peace, all it does is make us think that we have some divine ability or agenda or idea or so on, and we enforce it upon everybody else as well. Right? If everybody's running around trying to be God, then everyone is trying to have their own ideas and agendas put forward. And this is the problem. So we can never actually achieve unity that way. And if we examine the subcontinent after Shankaracharya's teachings became very popular, we can see that this is exactly what has happened. Right? Even with so many groups and so many people espousing this idea of all is one, there's been so many divisions amongst what is called the Hindu religion. There's so many divisions across the subcontinent. There's actually been physical division of the entire country. So there's never actually been unification at all by preaching all is one. And if we contrast this to the rule of Maharaj Yudhishthir and Maharaj Parikshit, as been explained so nicely in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we can see that there was real unity, and along with it, the real prosperity. And this all came from being united under the one Supreme Father, Lord Krishna, and engaging in his devotional service unselfishly with love. Thus, it is Lord Chaitanya who is given the direct meaning of the Vedanta Sutra. No Vedic scripture should be used for indirect speculation. In addition to Shankaracharya, other materialistic philosophers like the atheist Kapila, Gautama, Ashtavakra, and Patanjali have put forward philosophical speculations in various ways. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come to give us the correct understanding of Vedanta, of course, which is one of the philosophical schools in India. Okay, so we read in the last few weeks how Shankaracharya actually hijacked the Vedanta in order to put forward his monism and integrate it into one of these schools. Right, but Vedanta is a legitimate school. It's just not explained by Shankaracharya's monism. Right, Vedanta is actually explained as devotional service, of course. But it can be explained by quite a few different methods in devotional service. We read how all the different Vaishnava schools have their own way of putting forward the devotional service of Vedanta. Some of them do actually explain it through monism, some explain it through dualism, some explain it through a combination of monism and dualism. But the most perfect explanation was by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Right? It makes sense. He is the one who gave us the Vedanta as Srila Vyasadeva. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's explanation of Vedanta philosophy is called Achintya Beda Bed Tattva. Right? So the Achintya Beda Bed Tattva Vedanta is basically our philosophical school as Gaudiya Vaishnavas who ascribe to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings. And this is where we fit into this these philosophical schools of Indian thought. Right? So our school of Vedanta is also called Uttara Mimamsa, and we'll explain a little later what that means. Right? So let's now just focus on these schools of thought. So what do they actually mean? So these philosophies are there to help to answer the questions that we've been asking since the beginning of time. Right? We all want to understand who we are. We all want to understand why we're here. We all want to understand what our purpose is or what our function is while we're here, and we all want to understand where we're going. And those are the basic questions that plague philosophers. So there are many schools of thought in India that aim to answer these questions, and they can be broadly divided into the Astika schools and the Nastika schools. Right? The Astic schools are based on the Vedas, so they take their direction from the Vedas in order to answer these questions. And there are 6 of them, and the Vedanta school is one of them, right? Because we know that the Vedanta is based in the Upanishads, and the Upanishads are part of the Vedas. The Gnostic schools don't believe in the Vedic authority, and there are quite a few of them. One, of course, that comes to mind very quickly is Buddhism. Buddhism rejects the Vedas. We know why Lord Buddha had to do that. Also, we may have heard of Srila Prabhupada mention Charvak Muni. So Charvak philosophy is part of the Gnostic school as well. Okay. Srila Prabhupada said that the Gnostics are atheists essentially, because if you reject the Vedas, then you reject Krishna, because the Vedas are Krishna and helping us to achieve Krishna. So let's go back to the Astic school. So we said that the Vedanta school is one of them, and this school was taught by Srila Vyasadeva. We come under that school. So do the Mayavadis, right? Because Shankaracharya used the Vedanta philosophy to put forward his ideas. Right? So there are 6 schools under this, and there are 5 others, of course, other than Vedanta. And Sri Prabhupada gave us some names. So there's the Sankhya school, which is taught by Kapila Muni. This, of course, is the incarnation of the Supreme Lord. And the philosophy of Sankhya Yoga is explained very nicely in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. But there was also an atheist Kapila, who put forward an atheist explanation of Sankhya. So we're going to discuss this a bit further. Then the 3rd school is the Patanjali school, right, which gave us yoga. You've heard of the Patanjali Sutras. Gautama Muni, he taught Nyaya philosophy. Kanada, who came up with the Vaisheshika system, and Jaimini, and he preached Karma Mimamsa, which is also known as Purva Mimamsa. So we'll read a bit more about them from our text. Indeed, the philosopher Jaimini and his followers, who are all more or less logicians, have abandoned the real meaning of the Vedas, devotional service, and try to establish that the absolute truth is subordinate to the material world. It is their opinion that if there is a God, he will be pleased with us and give us all desired results if we simply perform our material activities nicely. So Jaimini's philosophy is based a lot in Karma Kanda. Okay, we already spoke a little bit about Karma Kanda. It's actually supposed to help one get closer to the Lord through accumulation of piety, and therefore it guides one towards devotional service. But here Srila Prabhupada is saying that rather, Jaimini has taught that the absolute truth, that God is subordinate to the material world. So rather than rendering service to Krishna, he's explained the philosophy of Karma Kanda, or the rituals of Karma Kanda, according to us getting things from God. Okay, so we will just go through that quickly. What it means is that what Karma Mimamsa is saying, that if we look at the Vedas, they're giving us, look at the Vedas critically, they're giving us these karma kanda sacrifices to impel God to give us what we want. That's what it's trying to say, basically. So in a way, it's like taking service from God. It's like saying that if I do a certain amount of karma kanda rituals or certain amount of activity, that God will just have to supply whatever I need in exchange. Okay. So we remember this from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Krishna is explaining to his father Nanda Maharaj in the pastime of lifting Govardhan Hill, that actually the cowherd people don't owe Indra anything, that Indra is impelled to give them whatever they need because of their activities in karma and because of their rituals and so on. So in a way, this philosophy is true of the demigods, because the demigods are not giving us anything out of the goodness of their heart or out of love, for example. They're giving us what we need based on our karma. Right? So whatever our karma is, whatever we earn, they have to give it to us. It's something that that they don't really have any actual control over. But Krishna is completely independent, right? Swarat. So it means that he doesn't owe us anything. That no matter how much we can actually do, it's only what we deserve, what he thinks we deserve, that he will sanction. Right? So Purma Mimamsa is therefore like a sort of a misinterpretation of this understanding of what the Vedas is teaching by these Vedic rituals, and this is why Srila Prabhupada actually rejects this, right? We can see that. So Purma Mimamsa is focusing more on the ritualistic side. We said that our philosophy of Vedanta is actually known as Uttara Mimamsa. So Purva means before, Uttara means after. So before, when the Purva Mimamsa came out, it was more about the Vedic rituals. And then after the Uttara Mimamsa, the Vedanta was more about the Jnana side, more about the meditation and more about the understanding. That's how the two are actually opposites of each other. Then we go on to understanding another aspect of philosophy. Similarly, the atheist Kapila tried to establish that it is not God who created the material world, but rather a combination of material elements. So this atheist Kapila was speaking about an atheistic explanation of Sankhya Yoga. Now, we also said that Sankhya Yoga comes from the Lord, comes from Lord Kapila. And Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita in the 1st chapter that one can actually get the same results by performing devotional service and performing Sankhya. So if Sankhya is atheistic, how is this possible? It's only because the atheist Kapila has given us an atheist explanation of Sankhya Yoga. The real Sankhya Yoga is actually, of course, having parallels to devotional service in explaining that there is a spiritual reality and a material reality. The spiritual reality is the supreme consciousness, who is the witness of all our activities, who perceives everything. And the material reality is Prakriti, okay? Material energy, which is perceived as the mind, as the perceptions from the mind, as well as the miseries that the mind perceives. So the living being, when it comes in contact with matter, is bonded to matter, and then experiences through all of the different elements here, the mind, the perception, and miseries, all kinds of suffering. And the point of all religious activities is to free the soul from its contact with the material nature through insight, through basically spiritual knowledge, okay? Through what they say, I'm just going to put it down here. Metaphysics, right? Through the metaphysics. So certainly we've practically explained the theories of devotional service, right? This is certain. But we can also understand how this can be interpreted in an atheistic way if we take that supreme consciousness as being Brahman and explain it as being all of us, like Shankaracharya has explained it. That if we all free ourselves from material nature, we'll suddenly realize ourselves as Brahman, and we'll all be a part of that one Brahman, that one supreme consciousness. Okay, so this is the teachings of the atheist Kapila, how he's twisted this the Sankhya philosophy to suit him and his atheist philosophy, in the same way that Purva Mimamsa has been misinterpreted by Jaimini. So let's go on to the next two. Gautama and Kanada have also given stress to the material elements, trying to establish that atomic energy is the origin of creation. So these two schools, Gautama Muni's school is called Nyaya, and Kanada's school is called Vaisheshika. Both of them they have a metaphysical understanding as well. And theirs is that the atom is the basis of everything, which of course modern science agrees on, and which is explained even in the Srimad Bhagavatam and in the Vedas, therefore. So that is true. Just like all of these schools have some real understanding underlying what they believe. But after that, they don't really give any kind of understanding that it's the super soul that pervades all the elements, right, from the atom, and as the atom progresses into forming different shapes and forms and all the reactions that come from those, they give no importance to the role of the Supreme Lord, although there is some idea that there's a divine consciousness. This consciousness is not identified as actually coming from the Lord. The Nyaya school in particular focuses on how one can figure out how this is all happening, what's behind all of this creation through what is called pramanas, ways in which we can perceive knowledge. And that is perception, inference, comparison, analogy, postulation, non-perception, and getting the testimony of experts. Okay, that's so Nyaya tries to get the knowledge of everything as it is through realism, through logic, through analysis and argument. Okay. Nyaya is saying that all our miseries are coming from us not understanding things as they are, being in illusion, that we need to have knowledge to get out of it. Therefore, there's so much emphasis there. And Vaisheshika is saying that there is some kind of divine presence, but in not directly identifying it as coming from the Supreme, it could actually be coming from us as the Supreme also. In that way, it could also be um, impersonal. And they focus on two pramanas to try to understand it, logic and inference. And then we come to Astavakra. Impersonalists and monists like Ashtavakra have tried to establish the impersonal effulgence or Brahmajyoti as the supreme. So Ashtavakra is a lot like impersonalism. He wrote an Ashtavakra Gita, although he's not really a formal school, but his teachings are very much like Shankaracharya's in explaining that this material world is false and that we are the only reality and that we are all Brahman, or essentially the Supreme Lord ourselves. And Patanjali, one of the greatest authorities on the yoga system, has tried to conceive of an imaginary form of the Supreme Lord. So the yoga system is actually based in the Sankhya philosophy. So it needs a philosophical basis, which it gets from there. But it aims to achieve the freedom of the soul from the prakriti, from the material nature, which it does acknowledge through yoga. And yoga requires renunciation. So this is an important point for the modern yogis, that one just can't engage in yoga without being renounced. Therefore, we have yama and niyama at the beginning, regulations, rules and regulations that one has to follow. And from this renunciation, one engages in yoga through the knowledge of Sankhya. And one can then achieve samadhi and liberation, because all these schools are aiming for liberation eventually. Okay. In summary, it should be understood that all these materialistic philosophers have tried to avoid the Supreme Personality of Godhead by putting forward their own mentally concocted philosophy. So I think we can see that, how they've deliberately been able to write the Lord out of his own knowledge, right? Write him out of the Vedic knowledge. But Vyasadeva, the great sage and incarnation of Godhead, has thoroughly studied all these philosophical speculations, and in answer has compiled the Vedanta Sutra, which describes the relationship of everything with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the execution of devotional service, and the ultimate achievement, love of Godhead. Okay, so we recognize the three things that Sri Prabhupada is mentioning here, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan. This is what Vedanta is about. The Vedanta Sutra begins with the aphorism Janmadi Asya Yataha, which Vyasadeva explains in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, thus establishing from the very beginning that the supreme source of everything is a cognizant, transcendental person. So the problem with these philosophers using the Vedic ideas is that not them and not their philosophers can get any benefit from it. Okay, when the Supreme Lord gives us knowledge, that knowledge is coming from him and is about him. Therefore, it has the ability to do what he can do, right? Because the knowledge is him. Krishna's knowledge, the knowledge that he gives us, the knowledge of him, thus has the ability to liberate us. Krishna is the only one who can give liberation. He alone is known as Mukunda. No other personality, no matter how powerful, if not the demigods themselves, right, certainly not philosophers, can give liberation besides the Lord. Therefore, it's important that all knowledge comes from the Lord, that it's received in the descending way and not in the way of the sending process from these kinds of philosophers. They cannot, although their philosophies may sound clever to their followers, they cannot guarantee at all that liberation is actually going to be the result. They can't actually offer any benefit because their knowledge is mundane. It's coming from a material person. Therefore, Srila Vyasadeva himself, right, being the Supreme Lord, has come to give us the real understanding of the Vedic teachings through the Vedanta. And further, he gave us the commentary, a personal commentary on the person of the Vedanta in the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is very important for us in this age when we're short-lived, misguided, unlucky, and disturbed. We can go directly to the Srimad Bhagavatam and understand what the Vedanta is trying to teach us about the Lord. And at the same time, we can be engaging in devotional service so that we can get to a love of Godhead. The impersonalist tries to explain that the Supreme Lord's impersonal effulgence, the Brahmajyoti, is beyond the material modes of nature, but at the same time, he tries to establish that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is contaminated by the modes of material nature. In truth, the Vedanta Sutra establishes not only that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is transcendental to the material modes of nature, but also that he has innumerable transcendental qualities and energies. All these various speculative philosophers are one in denying the existence of the Supreme Lord Vishnu, and they are very enthusiastic to put forward their own theories and be recognized by the people. Unfortunate persons become enamored of these atheistic philosophers and thus can never understand the real nature of the absolute truth. So what should we do about it? It is far better to follow in the footsteps of great souls or Mahajanas. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 12 Mahajanas. 1 is Brahma, 2 is Lord Shiva, 3 is Narada, 4 is Vaivashvata Manu, 5 is Kapila, and that's not the atheist that we spoke about, but the original Lord Kapila. 6 are the Kumaras, 7 is Prahlad, 8 is Bhishma, 9 is Janaka, 10 is Bali, 11 is Shukadev Goswami, and 12 is Yamaraj. According to the Mahabharata, there is no point in arguing about the absolute truth because there are so many different Vedic scriptures and philosophical understandings that no one philosopher can agree with another. Since everyone is trying to present his own point of view and reject others, it is very difficult to understand the prime necessity of life expressed by religious principles. Therefore, it is better to follow in the footsteps of the Mahajanas, or great souls. Then one can achieve the desired success. So we've also said many times that to argue with all these different people and to waste our time trying to go through all these philosophies and get confused ourselves is not going to achieve much. Okay, what we need to do is just have an understanding of these for our own faith to be strengthened and also to address constructive inquiries, right, about these. But more important than that is that we should focus on performing devotional service following in the footsteps of these great personalities. And they have been empowered, right, by their love for the Lord and their spiritual knowledge in order to guide us softly, authoritatively, and we can make progress in devotional service by following them. Lord Chaitanya's teachings are just like nectar, and they hold whatever you need. The best way is to take to this path and follow it. This is a very nice conclusion from Prakashananda Saraswati. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us the best, most perfect understanding of Vedanta philosophy in the Chintya Tattva. He's taught us the chanting of the holy names by which we can purify ourselves and make progress, real progress towards attaining love of Godhead. Of course, the holy names are Krishna himself, so they're the goal also. And we can have the understanding of all knowledge, right, without even making an effort. And with that understanding, we can definitely attain Krishna. So thank you all so much for your kind attention. I know it's been a bit long and it's been a lot of terms. I hope it's clear. And next week, we're going to continue with chapter 22. So please join us then. Shri Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Are there any questions or comments or anything else to clarify?
Hi, Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for the wonderful class.
Thank you for the service.
Thank you. Maharaj, could you please explain Sambandha, Prayojana, and Abhideya? Just
Abhideya.
Yeah,
So
thank you. The three.
So this is actually the entire process of devotional service. We start off with Sambandha, which is actually the stage of self-realization. This implies that we understand ourselves to be the soul practically. So right now, we don't have that practical knowledge of the body and the soul. We understand ourselves theoretically to be the soul. But when you understand yourself practically to be the soul, you have realized knowledge, which is called Vigyan. There's a difference between Gyan and Vigyan. So Gyan is just the theoretical knowledge that we now have by reading our scriptures, by hearing. Vigyan is realized knowledge. That's when I am not acting from my body. Right now, we're all acting from our body. We're all acting from the identity that we have, that we're so-and-so, born in a certain place, living in a certain area doing a certain thing, right? All according to the body. This is true even if we are in spiritual life or in the practice of devotional service. But when we are acting from the platform of the soul, when we've realized ourselves to be something beyond the body, this is when we actually have attained Sambandha. So the Mayavadis get to the stage. The problem is that when they understand themselves to be the soul, they kind of think that that's it. Because when you're on the soul level, for them, you're on the Brahman level, which is also true. But for them, that means they've become Brahman. For the devotee, it's only the beginning. It means that now one actually has to develop the relationship with God. Because at the stage of Sambandha, we also understand that there is something more than just knowing that we're the soul. The soul has activity, duty. It has an identity. It has to do something. It has to achieve something. So this is our relationship with God. So, for example, through all these philosophical systems, you're actually supposed to then understand there is a God, and one should try to understand one's relationship with God. And when one understands that one is a servant of God, then one goes to the next step, which is abhideya, developing that relationship in devotional service. So this is the actual stage of devotional service. We're not there yet. We haven't reached Sambandha, so we're not at abhideya. We're actually trying to get to Sambandha, so we're in the practice of devotional service. When we achieve Sambandha, then we can move on to real devotional service, abhideya, on the platform of knowing that we're the soul, knowing that Krishna is God, and developing our relationship with Him. And when we do develop that relationship, when we attain love of Godhead, then that third stage is prayojan. And that stage is pure service in pure love for Krishna. This is the goal of life. So there are three deities of these three stages. Lord Madan Mohan helps us to understand our Sambandha. Lord Govindaji helps us to execute devotional service after that realization. And Lord Gopinath is actually the Prayojan Murti. And it's described that he calls the gopis by playing his flute, so he calls us once we've achieved our love of Godhead. And there's also three acharyas that help us in these stages. Sanatana Goswami is our Sambandha Acharya. Rupa Goswami is our Abhideya Acharya, right? So much of his works are about the practice of devotional service. And Raghunath Das Goswami is our Prayojan Acharya, and he was, of course, so absorbed in love of Godhead that he would regularly forget, actually was completely forgetful of himself. So absorbed he was in the service of the Lord. Is that clear, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Maji, thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, dear Mataji. Thank you very much for wonderful class.
Hare Krishna,
I want to ask you if it's a wrong way to study Patanjali Aphorisms. Because here in our ISKCON, they try to attract people by presenting first Patanjali. Yes. And it's a wrong way.
Yes, I understand. It's not the wrong way if it's taught in relation to devotional service. Okay. And it's not taught as the goal of life or taught as greater than or more important than chanting the holy names and engaging in other direct ways of service to the Lord. So we read that these systems, including Patanjali, have their basis in the Vedas. It's just that they've taken whatever idea they wanted out of it and then ran in a completely different direction, basically towards or generally towards impersonalism. Like Srila Prabhupada says, they're imagining some concept of God, and a lot of the times the yoga teachers are teaching that we're meant to, through the yoga, discover the divine within and all kinds of other concepts that lean very much towards impersonalism. But if we're teaching it alongside devotional service as a way to attract people into devotional service, we sometimes do that. We sometimes do teach yoga as a way to draw in those who have an interest in it, for them to find that yoga is actually, eventually they'll find that yoga is actually not the real way to attain to self-realization, that it's something that can be done like any other exercise, we could say, in this age, because it really has more of an exercise benefit in this age. One's not going to really get any spiritual benefit if one can't engage in yoga the way it used to be done. But if they can understand eventually that it is that kind of thing, it's getting one some kind of benefit. But then the aim is that when the body is more healthy, one engages in devotional service. That's the point. The whole point is that whatever one is doing, whether it's work, whether it's yoga, all of it just means that we're trying to engage it in devotional service in some way eventually, particularly in chanting. So if it's taught alongside devotional service, and if we have the right understanding, and we throw out all the impersonal ideas, and we don't make it that yoga is more important than chanting, then there's no real problem with it, I think. Is that okay, Master?
Thank you very much, Mataji. Dadava pranams. Haribol.
Thank you. I will. I remember your question from last week. It's actually, I realize it's quite a long answer because the Lord put forward many beautiful arguments. And I thank you for that question because it made me summarize it a bit. So I'll post it on the WhatsApp group because it's a bit much to say. Hope that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Mataji. Dadava pranams.
Thank you.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna. Are there any other questions or comments? If there's none, then we will sing a bhajan before we close. On Monday, we are going to start the holy month of Purushottam. The great Savanga Sundari Mati gave a very nice class on this. I think it's on our Facebook page about the glories of Purushottam month, and she explained some of the devotional activities that are recommended there. So we can try to engage in as many of those as possible, and we'll put some more information in the coming days. And one of the bhajans that Mataji recommended is the Nanda Nanda Sakam. We're going to sing that today so that we can get a little used to the tune, perhaps if we'd like to sing it. Otherwise, we can. It is, of course, possible to play these. There's quite a lot of YouTube videos and stuff. I'm sure there are some on SoundCloud as well, but I've just checked YouTube, and we can make the most of this holy month. It's really really a special blessing. Of course, we are always meant to be engaging in devotional service throughout the year with love, but these are, like Prabhupada explained, transcendental sales that come around, particularly this month comes around every 33 months, that's 2 to 3 years. So then we get an extra burst of mercy, an extra opportunity to improve in our devotional practices and to get clear of our sins and to make some progress. So this is our chance. Okay. Sucharuvagramandalam Sukharnaratnakundalam Suchashitangachandanam Namami Nandanandanam Sudhirganetrapankajam Shikandamudajam Anangakotimohanam Namami Nandanandanam Sunasikagrahmoktikam Vachandadantapangkikam Navambudangachikanam Namami Nandanandanam Karena Venuranjitam Gati Karindra Ganjitam Sukulapita Shobhanam Namami Nandanandanam Dribhanga Deva Sundaram Nakhadyuti Sudakaram Amoya Ratna Bhushanam Namami Nandanandanam Sugandha Angasorabham Uruvi विराजितो शुभं पुरश्रीवत्सलञ्चनं नमामि नन्दनन्दनं वृन्दावनसुनगरं विलासनुगवाससं सुरेन्द्रगर्वमोचनं नमामि नन्दनन्दनं प्रजङ्गननायकं सदा सुखप्रदायकं जगन्महाप्रलोभनं नमामि नन्दनन्दनम् श्रीनन्दनन्दन अष्टकं पतेभ्यः तथायान्वितः सरेद्भवद्भिन्दुस्तरं लभेतदङ्घ्रियुग्मकम्. To read the translation, I offer pranam to Nanda Nandana, whose face is extremely delightful, in whose beautiful ears hang jeweled earrings, and whose entire body is anointed with fragrant chandan. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandana, whose eyes are more beautiful than the fully bloomed lotus, whose head is beautifully adorned with an arrangement of peacock feathers, and who enchants millions of cupids. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandana, from whose beautiful nose hangs an elephant's pearl, whose teeth are immensely effulgent, whose bodily complexion is more beautiful and lustrous than a fresh rain cloud. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandan, whose lotus hands hold a flute, whose lingering gait defeats even that of an impassioned elephant, and whose dark limbs are beautified by a yellow shawl. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandana, whose threefold bending posture is exquisitely elegant, the effulgence of whose toenails put to shame even the moon, and who wears invaluable jewels and ornaments. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandan, whose body exudes an especially beautiful fragrance, and whose broad chest is adorned with the Kastuba jewel and the mark of Srivatsa. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandana, the expert lover of Vrindavan, who performs immaculate pastimes, and who is attired in clothes which are suitable for those pastimes, and who pulverize the pride of Indra. I offer pranam to Nanda Nandana, who as the lover of the Vrajagopis perpetually delights them, and who enchants the minds of all living entities. Whoever regularly recites this Sri Nandanandashtakam will easily cross the seemingly insurmountable ocean of material existence and attain eternal residence at the lotus feet of Krishna. Sri Nandanandan ki jai, Sri Nandanandashtakam ki jai, Purushottam ki jai, Jai Gaura Hari ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Shintai Goswami Nande Hari Hari Bom. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us again, and please join us next week, and have a blessed beginning of the Purushottam month. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.